Well, welcome back to Restoring Home, where we talk about marriage, parenting, and faith. And today our topic is reading to children. And I have as guest here Donna, my wife, who is in our family the #1 reader of books to our children. And she's read to them a lot, thousands and thousands of pages. So we're going to talk about that. I want to read something first. This was shared with me today. From a book called The Enchanted Hour. The miraculous power of reading to your kids. And since that's what we're talking about, this little publisher's description I thought was worth reading most of it for us to sort of set up things today as we're going to talk about this in detail. So it's a Wall Street Journal writer's conversation-changing look at how reading aloud makes adults and children smarter, happier, healthier, more successful, and more closely attached, even as technology pulls us apart. Listen to that list again. That's pretty amazing what reading to your children will do. It's all the things we want. Smarter, happier, healthier, more successful, and more closely attached. Says the Enchanted Hour explains the dazzling cognitive and social emotional benefits that await children, whatever their nationality or background. It's not just about bedtime stories for little kids. Reading aloud consoles, uplifts, and invigorates at every age, deepening the intellectual lives and emotional well-being of teenagers and adults too. The author Megan Cox-Gurdon agrees that this ancient practice is a fast-working antidote to the fractured attention spans. This is really great, because this is what technology is the enemy of this, and so. Says that the ancient practice of reading to your children is a fast-working antidote to the fractured attention spans, atomized families, and unfulfilling, I don't know what the word is. What is this word? EPHEMERA. I need to read ephemera of the tech era, helping to replenish what our devices are leeching away. For everyone reading aloud engages in the mind in complex narratives for children, and it's an irreplaceable gift that builds vocabulary, fosters imagination, and kindles a lifelong appreciation of language, stories, and pictures. I really like this part about it. It's a fast-working antidote to fractured attention spans and atomized families to replenish what our devices are leeching away. So I just thought this is really very affirming of what we're going to talk about today, which is reading to our kids. So you were the one who did the reading. I've told stories. I've made up stories primarily.
Which you're really good at.
Yeah, but there's something to reading one where you're both engaging. So I just want talk a little bit about, first of all, I recall seeing you on the couch in our living room, homeschooling the kids, and here are the kids piled up. Sometimes there's a little one that's a baby or nursing or just toddler, but since we had 5, we had all these ages, and so we have usually one on this side, and one on the outside leaning in. They're all huddled in, leaning, trying to see the words and the pictures as you read the book to them. And whatever the age was, they're leaning into these books and they're really engaged in them. And there you all are
leaning
on the couch.
in on me.
That's right. That's right.
Squished.
I need to breathe. But I remember you being on that couch hours and hours and hours and reading to them all kinds of things.
It was so sweet. Such a sweet time.
Yeah, you could tell it was. So, so talk a little bit about what you did, what it did for you, or for them, or for your relationship. So, thoughts on that?
I really related to that part where they said it strengthens connection, because I feel like, or I know, when we would read, then questions would come up. Like, well, why did they do that? Their family
or what is
so
that word
different.
that I was
or
just
what's
trying
that
to
word? Yeah.
Let's go look it
I
up.
have to go look it up. But, we would just talk about life, families, decisions, character, what did they make a good decision? Oh no, what's going to happen next? And it just really made, one thing, it made history come alive, because a lot of what we were reading was historical fiction. So if we were studying ancient Egypt, then we were reading Mara, Daughter of the Nile, and the Golden Goblet, and these are stories that our kids wanted to read over and over because they were so good. And it was fun. It was fun to learn that way. So just the memories, the connection, the opportunity for discussion, all of those are wonderful reasons to be reading with the kids.
I notice that I would say all our kids for sure. I know a few of our kids just became voracious readers on their own. And I mean, a lot of reading and enjoyed it, preferred it over entertainment of other kinds, technology and movies and things. They just would read and read, still do. And do you think that love for reading came out of that?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, if you're not exposed to living books, like books that are really classic, it's a story for all time. If you're not exposed to that, and you're just getting pop culture, kind of all the new stuff that the librarians put out on the shelves and looks so pretty, if that's all that you're reading, you might not be getting what's going to really make a difference in their life and capture their imagination.
Can you give an example of maybe one of those
living
books you're talking about?
I mean, even just little children's books, sometimes they were written a long time ago. They're out of print even. You just have to get a hold of a good list and find them at the library.
I have a book here. Let me just mention this real quick.
Yeah, you can mention that.
There's a book here I just happen to have, Classics to Read Aloud to Your Children.
Yeah.
And in it has some of those stories.
Yeah.
They're great. I mean, Tom.
And I thought of another one when we were talking earlier, before we started the film, is the Book of Virtues. And it's just one story after another that kind of goes along with a theme, like kindness or gentleness or courage. And they're stories that our kids loved. They loved hearing all about, because they were from ancient cultures, or they were from early American history. Some of them were boring, like it might be something George Washington wrote, but we would read it because it was the next thing to read. And they would suffer through it and get something from it. I forgot what your original question was.
Well, I was talking about just classics. Some of them you could mention.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, even like as they get older, Little House on the Prairie, that series, Narnia, Hobbit, all the Lord of the Rings. It's like
I'm gonna read
even little kids will listen to these stories.
They will. And I'm going to give you an example.
Yeah.
Just to open the page. I looked at this one. This is from The Call of the Wild, kind of a classic. Just open it up, and here it
It's
is. You
powerful.
can drop right in, and you
Yeah.
see how, especially little boys, even little girls, they can get
Yeah.
into this. It was a hard day's run up the canyon, through sheep camp, past the scales and the timberline, across glaciers and snowdrifts hundreds of feet deep, and over the great Chilkoot Divide, which stands between the salt water and the fresh, and guards forbiddingly the sad and lonely north. They made good time down the chain of lakes, which fills the craters of extinct volcanoes, and late that night pulled into the huge camp at the head of Lake Bennett. It just pulled into this. Your imagination can go wild. So
You
good
have to
writing.
start imagining,
Yeah, good stuff. So
So for small children, things like The Story of Ping and Make Way for Ducklings, these are old. Blueberries for Sal.
The Giving Tree.
The Giving Tree, yeah, that came out when we were in college. I guess that was a long time ago.
I have a few here that I'm going to mention.
Yeah,
I'm just
go
going to
ahead.
bring up.
I love that one.
And part of an opportunity we have to read to our children is to choose what is read
right.
to them. The values that are being put in there. What I'm seeing now, very overt and dominant, is an enormous amount of material that's coming out that is very well done, very
agenda.
colorful, very illustrated by some of the best, packaged really well, and yet the content is wicked. It is evil. It is twisted. It's not true. The enemy is really able to make things sparkle that are rotten on the inside. And so parents have to be very vigilant.
Yeah.
And it's not just books. Of course, it's television and cartoons and videos and superheroes and all these things that are now used to be safe, but not now. So this is a chance for parents to choose for their families things that do promote truth and good morals and values. And so, and there are a lot of old ones, and there's some new ones coming out. In fact, there's a whole wave of good stuff coming out, but parents have to be very vigilant on that. Here's one called The Very Worried Sparrow. Do you remember this one? I think you may have introduced me to this one. This is one of these little thick pages for little bitty hands and little kids. They won't tear the pages. It's really well illustrated. It's simple, it's sweet, but it's about a worried sparrow, and it says he worried about finding food, learning to fly, what would happen in winter, even finding a mate and building a nest. And then one day he made a discovery which changed his whole life. Wow, I would want to see that. And this picture of the very worried little sparrow, he looks very worried on his perch there. So that kind of book, here's one. I use this one often for people. And in counseling, I use this one. It's called You Are Special by Max Lecato. And it talks about how people label us, and we begin to believe their labels, and what it takes to break away from the labels and know our true value and our true worth. It comes from our maker. And so this is so well illustrated. It's just beautifully illustrated. There's a larger edition, other editions of it. This is again for little kids that can hold it and chew on it and not tear the pages, and you can read to them, but just well done material. So that one is called You Are Special. Are you familiar with this one?
I love that one.
Sydney and Norman. Okay, Sydney and Norman, A Tale of Two Pigs.
I think we gave that to all of our kids one year.
We did.
For Christmas.
We did. And that's another thing I would encourage people to think about is giving books, good books, grandparents to give good books to their adult children who have their own children. In fact, this year, at the end of the year, we're going to have a time where we package up a number of really good books that we want our kids to have so they can read them to our grandchildren, birthdays, gifts. Always giving our really good books that are well done as far as the illustrations and quality of the books, but they're also the content is wonderful. And this little story is about two pigs who are neighbors and how they learn to value one another's differences. And it's in a healthy way. There are other books that are talking about differences and they really twist it. This is very, very healthy.
Right.
So these are sweet little books that your kids can read over and over again, and they teach them such good principles for life.
Yeah.
In addition to reading them aloud to the kids and the benefits that we've seen in that. So you mentioned, I asked you earlier, where did you get the idea of reading aloud? Did your mom and dad read to you?
Well, I was in a class in college called Children's Literature for my education classes, and the teacher asked, what was a favorite book growing up? And, we started over here. There were probably like, 30 people in the classroom. And I was about in the middle. And I was listening and intrigued because I was like, I never heard of any of these books. And I was like, so I was taking notes. I was like, I want to read that one. I'm excited. I'm going to learn all these new books. It's getting closer to me, and I started panicking. I was like, I can't think of a book that my mom read to me. I can't think of one, or my dad. And then I remembered Green Eggs and Ham. I was like, okay, there's one book. I was like, I don't know if I read that in school or if my mom read it to me. But we just didn't have books.
What kind of mom read it to me?
I think I confessed. I honestly wasn't read to very much. And it made me sad. I felt sorry for little Donna. And I determined then, if I have children, I want to read to them a lot. And so we did. We always had lots of books around. And as I got into homeschooling, then I realized the whole idea of living books, which came from Charlotte Mason. And her idea, she's from the 1800s, I think, but her idea was just that books that change you and it's usually classic books that are just like the classics to read aloud to your children. They're stories that will shape you. And So I realized I want to make sure that I get a hold of a list of what are the living books. So I just started reading books about Charlotte Mason and also buying curriculum that sort of leaned that direction of having those living books. And one of them was Sunlight curriculum, which I don't think we remembered to mention in the homeschool video that we did the other day. But there's a curriculum just called Sunlight Curriculum, S-O-N, Sunlight, and it just has list upon list of every year your different whatever history you're studying. Then they'll have a long list of read alouds in books that the child will read as well, that are in that time period, and they're amazing. Like I remember one year we did a lot of books that were from Asia, and so it was just delightful. It was a whole new culture that we didn't know much about. So you learn so much about people, cultures, character, like character traits that you want to instill in your children. So
Let me ask you about when you read to the kids, kind of help us understand, what did you do to get them to sit still, to get into, how did you start it so that the children would sit and listen? Like what age were they when you started, or what time of day or night? Was it the same all the time? Kind of give people an idea of how to get the thing going.
I was usually reading during the day, the longer books, and then I was reading during the day, the longer books, and then for the smaller, when the children are small, we would read books at night before they went to bed. But I mean, we read throughout the day too, but we would read before they went to bed. I don't know. I guess you just have to make sure it's kind of at their level and it's something that they would be interested in.
When did you start? When they're like 1 year or 5 years? Or?
I mean, we started reading when they were tiny.
Like a year or 2 years?
Months old,
right.
Just depending on the book. But as far as books that had a lot of content, they were a little older. I don't know. I can't remember ages. Have to look at it.
So,
usually
but there's a time when you got the kids to enjoying books and not playing video games or wanting to go outside and run around. Somehow you got them to settle down and sit down and focus on the book. So how did you do that?
Well, if it's an engaging story and it's a topic that they might be interested in, for example, I read the first book for Little House on the Prairie that I read. I wanted to do the series, but I had boys that were the oldest. So we started with Farmer Boy. They loved it. They loved seeing all the different things he was doing on the farm. Well, once we got into, then we switched and kind of went back in time to, I think, Little House in the Big Woods. And that was okay, even though, because Pa was always there. And Pa was building things and, helping out in so many ways. And so they loved it. And then, of course, Hannah came along and she wanted to hear stories too. But when you have a little one, then sometimes it is hard. You have to either do it while they're napping so that the other kids can concentrate, or you find something that they can play with, and they're just kind of listening in and falling in love with the idea of stories too. I also did Little Men instead of Little Women. When we got ready to read something like that, I was just like, well, they might not like Little Women. I think they would have.
Just because you had boys.
I had boys to start out with. The oldest two were boys. So we read Little Men, and we loved that book. I loved that book so much.
Now you read later on, you mentioned earlier before we started recording here that you read some things like the Iliad and the Odyssey?
Well, yeah, we just did that for school because we had to do.
But you read it aloud?
Yeah.
Wow. Those things are about that thick.
I know.
In my mind, anyway. Those are really thick. And you read through
I think
all
they
that.
have shortened versions, so maybe we read them younger and shorter, like a abridged version.
The abridged version is that thick. That's wrong.
And they liked it because it was a journey and
That's
interesting.
I haven't read that much of the kids. I don't remember ever having a book read to me by either parent.
I'm sorry.
Or by
I'll
anybody
start
else.
reading to you, honey.
Yeah, thank you. But I enjoy hearing books read well with a good voice and somebody who's really carrying me along. And so I enjoy that. But I do see how there would have been a real connection had my dad read stories or my mom read stories to me. That would have not only been interesting, the story been interesting, but it would have really pulled us to closer. It would have been this little zone.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the, of course it was in the what I read as I opened up here was that's something that happens. There are things that take place that pull you together. And so I know a lot of parents are feeling the disconnect between themselves and their kids. Their kids they don't want to sit down. They don't even want to watch the same TV programs or videos. The kids want to run in and do their games, or they want to go get on the Facebook or social media and something. And so this is a way, according to this author we just looked at, this is a way that quickly reconnects. It stops that bad pattern, puts an end to it, and redirects things into a good way. So for that reason, we really want to encourage parents to start somewhere. And it sounds like get books on topics or subjects, so the genre, the type of book that your kids, boys, girls, athletes, adventuresome musicians, whatever they are, find something that really connects there and then jump in and start with that reading aloud to them at whatever age they are. Probably the younger the better, but even the older ones can be. I know there are a lot of good books out there with good morals and also true biographies that are very interesting.
Yeah.
I love Bruchko by Bruce Olson, about Bruce Olson's life. That is teenage boys. They love it. They love that
boys
book.
love that.
It's full. It was a true
Hannah
story.
loved it. Yeah.
Hannah loved it. It's a true story. So there's a lot of good literature out there. We'll try to have at the end of this video a few items listed that we've mentioned and some others, where people can go in and get a few good books to start with.
Yeah.
Of course, there are a lot available. Above everything, parents, besides reading to their children, need to be on top of what their children are listening to and watching and reading. Otherwise, and especially what schools are asking them to read, you really need to be on top of
careful.
that. Be careful, because reading is that powerful.
It is.
Good. Last word, anything to say?
Yeah, I was just thinking, Caleb called me. He's 34 now.
Caleb's our second born, for those who don't know.
And he called me a couple years ago and said, Mom, are you familiar with Wild and Free? It's a podcast. And I was like, nope. And he said, it's a homeschool podcast, and in it they're just describing basically what we did. And he said, and it just made me so thankful for all of the hours that you spent reading to us. And especially when we would go outside on a kind of, it's springtime, let's go outside and take some chai out, and we'll read a story. And we just get a blanket and sit out there in the sunshine. And so he just has such vivid memories. And it just was so gratifying that it was important and special to them. And I know now, watching them with their children, all the kids with their children, and reading so much to them and valuing education, valuing learning, it's meaningful. And I'm just so thankful.
Good. That's good feedback. That's what you want.
Yeah.
Good. So thanks for visiting with us today as we talked together about reading to our children, and we'll have some information at the end of the video for you about places you can go, books you can look at, maybe some to consider. But let me encourage you, take some time, figure out how to do it, and start reading to your kids. It's going to be very important going down the road, especially as more and more our culture begins to produce material that is not the kind of thing you want your children exposed to. We're going to have to be even more vigilant at making sure that we put into them, that we get into them, the sort of material that is really wholesome and character building and true. And it looks like the best way to do that is for you to read it to them. May God bless us. See you next time on Restoring